We begin the Gemara today on Daf Ayin, about 10 lines down from the top of the Yamud. It goes back to what it says in the Mishnah, Ha'evet paisel mishum bia chulu. The Mishnah there says, if you have a Bas Koyin, I believe it is, right, that's married to Yisrael, so if he has any descendant from this marriage, she cannot go back to her father's house to eat Truma. So if you have a descendant which is an Eved, that Eved is not your descendant. Right, that's a grandchild that would be an Eved, meaning that your son married a Shivcha Kananis, and now the grandchild is an Eved. So because the grandchild is an Eved, there's no yichus to the grandmother. So the Gemara here brings the source for this. My time, so what's the source that the Eved has no yichus to the grandmother? Omakra, because the pasuk says, Ha'isha v'yiladea tia gomer. What happens by a Shivcha that gives birth to a son? So this woman, this Shivcha, and her children, Tiyaladi now, they belong to the master. So if they belong to the master, they have no yichus to the grandmother. The next thing it said in the Mishnah was Mamzer, Poisel, Umachel. That if you have a descendant which is a Mamzer, so that Mamzer, it does have a yichus to the grandmother. Whether the grandmother is a Bas Koyin, to passel or to go back to Yitruma, or if this grandmother is a Bas Yisrael that was married to a Koyin, and now to enable her to eat Truma. So Tana Rabbana Menurt Nabraisa Vizera Einla. Pasuk says regarding a Bas Koyin that her husband died and she goes back to her father's house, she only goes back if she had no children. So Einli Ella Zara. So this means that she had no children, her own children. Zera Zara Minayin. How do I know grandchildren? Talmud Leima Vizera Einla Mikol Mokim. Any kind of Zera. Zera means any descendant, even grandchildren as well. Ainly Ella Zera kosher. So I would say maybe this is only kosher children. Zera apostle minayin. How do I know even children, illegitimate children, a mamzer is also included in Zera? Talmud loima v'zera ein law. It says ein with a tzedei. Doesn't say ein without a yud, which could be read on, or it says ein. Ein law means ayin law. That you have to analyze deeper to see if there's any kind of descendant. Not only a kosher child, even a not kosher child, which is a mamzer. Frek the Gemara, but this very pasuk, v'ha piktei lezera zara. Didn't you just say that v'zera ein law is already being used to teach me that even a descendant, a grandchild, is also part of zera? Says the Gemara, zera zara leyitzrich, to teach me that for a grandchild, that this is included in Zera. For that you don't even need a pasuk b'chlal. But that we know misvara. B'nei banim arehen kebanim. A grandson is just like a son itself. So for that you don't need a pasuk. So the Zera ein law is coming to teach me regarding the mamzer. Ki yitzrichra lezera pasel. So teaching me regarding a Zera pasel that it has a halacha of a Zera. Amalei Resh Lakish le Rabbi Yechanan. Resh Lakish said to Rabbi Yechanan regarding what it said in the Mishnah. So now the case in the Mishnah was that it says that you had over here, his daughter went, her daughter that is, went and got married to an Eved or an Eved Kechavim, either got married to an Eved or a Goy, and then the child that's born is a Mamzer. That's what the case the Mishnah said. So Amalei Resh Lakish le Rabbi Yechanan and Kaman. Who is the one that says that a woman that marries a Goy or a Eved Kanani, that the child will be a Mamzer? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva. This is Rabbi Akiva's opinion. The Amma Yesh Mamzer Mechayov Elaven. Rabbi Akiva's opinion, as we had many times before in the Masechta, is even a relationship that's not a chiv kares, it's just a chiv of a lav, the child born will also be a mamzer. So getting married to a goy or a evet kanani is only a lav, leitus chaten, so the child that's born according to him will be a mamzer. I can say that this follows even the opinion of Rabbanan. Even though usually the Rabbanan hold that a mamzer is only a child born from a relationship where there's an erva of kares, but in the case where the relationship was with a goy or an eved, the Rabbanan would agree. And we had this before in the Masechta. He said in the name of Rabbeinu, which is Rebbe, that Ovid Kechavim ve'eved haba Bas Yisrael, a goy or an eved that has a relation with a Bas Yisrael, havlad mamzer. The child is a mamzer, even though it's only a lav and not kares. This itself, by the way, earlier in the Masechta we had, was also a machlekes. And b'poel, if I remember correctly, we don't paskin this way. A mamzer is only a child that's born from a chiv kares or from a chiv misa, eshesish. The last thing it said in the Mishnah was sometimes you have kohen gadol pa'amim shepaisel. It's possible that sometimes a woman could have a grandchild, which is a Kohen Gadol, and because of that Kohen Gadol, her grandchild, she becomes possible of eating Truma. And the Mishnah described, you could have a Bas Kohen that marries a Yisrael, and then her daughter married to a Kohen, and her son is a Kohen, and her son could be a Kohen Gadol, but because of that Kohen Gadol, which is a descendant, alive from this marriage to the Yisrael, she becomes possible to eat Truma. And the Mishnah says that the grandmother says that, look, my grandson, which is a Kohen Gadol, is making me possible from eating Truma. So the Gemara brings a Braisa that says about this case, Tana Rabbanon, Hareini Kaparas Bembiti Kuza, that I should be a kapara for my grandson, the son of my daughter, which is a kuza. Kuza is like a small vessel, a small earthenware vessel, like a cheap, inferior earthenware vessel. Shemachileni betruma, because he gives me to eat truma. In other words, even if I have a grandchild, which is a mamzer, a grandchild which is an illegitimate child, but nevertheless, that he could be the cause why I can eat truma. If you have a Bas Yisrael that married a Kohen, so because of that child that's born, so therefore she cannot go eat truma. So she says, let me be a kapara for him. I take upon myself, anything I suffer should be a kapara for him. She's happy with this grandchild. Ve'eni kaparas ben biti kada, but I will not be a kapara for my grandson, which is a kada, which is a big, nice choshev keli, shepislani min truma. Even if he's a kohen gadol, but because of him, I become pasul to truma, like the case in the Mishnah. So she says, I don't want to be a kapara for him. She's disappointed with him. Hadran Allah Almana. This is the inclusion of the 7th Pedic of Masechta Yevamos. We begin a new Pedic which continues with the same halachas, benegeh to halachas of eating truma in different scenarios. Zok the Mishnah ha'arel v'chal ha'tmeim. A kohen, which is an arel, so Rashi says this because, why is he an arel? Because his brothers died by the bris, so they can't make a bris with his kohen. Or a kohen that's tamei, lo yochlu b'truma, so they can't eat truma. Nishaya and Vavdeyem, but their wives or their servants, which are kinyan kaspoy, he owns them, he got married to her, or he bought an eved, yaichlu b'truma, they could eat truma. So what the Mishnah is saying is that even though they can't eat, the kohen himself here can't eat truma, but it's a technicality, because he's an adol or he's tameh, but he's still a full-fledged kohen. So as long as he's a full-fledged kohen, his wife or his eved could eat truma. We had before in the Gemara used the expression pumaya kavlu. It's like his mouth is hurting him. There's something technical that's not allowing him to eat truma, but really he's a full kohen. Another halacha, pitzua, daka, okrus, shofcha. These are kohenim that cannot have any children, and the Mishnah right here in a moment will describe what a pitzua, daka, and okrus, shofcha are. So hein, they, the kohenim themselves, ve'avdeyen, and their servants as well, yoichlu, they can eat truma. Because again, the point is, this pitzua, daka, and krus, shofcha, he's a full-fledged kohen. The fact that he can't have any children, and therefore no one in Klal Yisrael is allowed to marry him, as we'll see, but he's a full kohen, so he can eat truma, and a servant, a eved that he buys, could also eat truma. But their wives cannot eat truma, and the reason is because you're not allowed to marry a krus shofcha or pitzua daka. It's a lav. So because you're getting married to someone that's pasul, so anytime a woman gets married to someone that she's not allowed, it pasels her from eating truma. If this woman married this kohen before he became a pitzua daka and krus shofcha, and later after they were married, the kohen became a pitzua daka or a krus shofcha, harei lo yochlu. So if they didn't have relations after he became a pitzua daka and krus shofcha, she was married legitimately to a kohen, so she can eat truma. Now the Mishnah explains, veizeu pitzua daka. Who is a pitzua daka? Kol sheniftzua beitzim shaloi. If the testicles are crushed and he can't have any children, afila achas man, even one of them, that's a pitzua daka. Krus shofcha. Kol shenichras hagid. If the aver itself is cut off, so that's a krus shofcha. Vim nishtayer ma'atara afila kuchut asayra. If the atara, that part of the aver where the bris is, that's what Rashi here says. So from that part, the last part of the aver, there's even a drop left over. Afila kuchut asayra, even like a hair breadth, kosher. Then he does not have a halacha of a krus shofcha, and he'll be kosher. You can marry him. Okay, we'll see more details about everything here in the Mishnah and the Gemara. The Gemara starts with the first halacha of the Mishnah that says that a kohen, a adol, cannot eat truma. Sagt the Gemara Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, Rabbi Lazar said, Minayin la'arol she'ein oichel b'truma. What's the source for this? That a kayin, which is an arol, does not eat truma. It says over here, by truma, toishav v'sacher, uses the term toishav v'sacher, lo yoichel bay. That the toishav v'sacher does not eat truma. And nema b'pesach, and nema toishav v'sacher b'pesach. It also says by the carbon pesach, the term toishav v'sacher, that toishav v'sacher does not eat from the pesach. Again, let's do this again because I read it in the reverse. So, nema toishav v'sacher b'pesach, and nema toishav v'sacher b'truma. Ma toishav v'sacher ha'ama b'pesach. So just like by the carbon pesach, the halacha is arol asabay, that an arol is not allowed to eat the carbon pesach. It says clearly v'chol arol la yechal bay. Af toishav v'sacher ha'ama b'truma. So too over here regarding the truma, arol asar bay. Arol is not allowed to eat truma. So this is the gzeira shava. Rabbi Akiva brings a different pasuk. Ein et tzarich, you don't need this gzeira shava. Harei u'aymer, the pasuk by truma itself says, ish, continuation of the pasuk over there is, ish mizera arain, if you're a tzarua or a zav, bakotchim lo yoichel, and that pasuk kotchim, Rashi says, refers to truma. That's what the pasuk is speaking about. So because it says a double lashon, ish, lo rabis arol. It comes to include also an arol that cannot eat truma. That's the machlokes Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara will explain now both opinions. Omar, so said in the Braisa, Rabbi Lazar Omer, nema toishav v'sacha b'pesach v'nema toishav v'sacha b'truma, and I compared the two. Ma toishav v'sacha omer b'pesach, arol asabay, by a korban pesach, the arol can eat from it. Av toishav v'sacha omer b'truma, arol asabay. So too by truma, an arol cannot eat. So the Gemara now analyzes this gzeira shava. Mufne, are these words toishav v'sacher that you have by truma and by pesach, are they extra? And therefore you're using it for gzeira shava? And the Gemara explains why it's asking whether it's extra. The lav mufne, because if these words here used to the gzeira shava are not extra, so then ikala mifrach, I can refute this gzeira shava. So the rule is, when it comes to gzeira shava, which is a limud, that's a halacha l'moshe misinai, if it's extra words, you can't refute this gzeira shava, even if you have any svara to say why these two cases should be different. But if they're not extra words, so then you could only use the gzeira shava as long as you don't have a refutation. So the Gemara explains over here, there's a very simple svara to say that you can't compare truma to carbon pesach. Ikle mifrach, mala pesach, carbon pesach is much more stringent than truma. Sheken chayav and olav mishum pigel. Carbon pesach you have a halacha of pigel when you have an intention to eat the carbon out of its time. Or v'naisar, there's the halacha of not being allowed to leave over the meat past its time. V'tamei, and also if you're tamei, so you're not allowed to eat from the carbon pesach. So you see over here that carbon pesach is much more stringent than when it comes to truma. Right, so in other words, the Gemara is basically asking, carbon pesach is kotchim, and truma is not on the level of kotchim. So how could you compare these two things? Okay, now Rashi says, when it says here tumah b'negei to carbon pesach, it means tumah saguf, and that you get koros. You get koros for this, so that's unique, b'negei to carbon pesach. So the Gemara explains, yes, you're right, afnuye mufna. Yeah, these words toishav and sacha that it says here are extra. So therefore we can't refute this gzeira shava. So the Gemara now asks further, Hai mufna. Which one of these words toishav and sacha are extra? The one that it says by truma or the one that it says by pesach? If you're going to tell me that the words toishav and sacha that it says by truma are extra, but why is it extra? Mitzrach tzrichi, we need both of these words, toishav and sacha. The Tanya, as we learned in the Braisa, toishav, when it says in the pasuk regarding a toishav and a sacha, by truma that is, so the pasuk over there says that toishav kayin v'sacher lo yochal kodesh. So what is it teaching me? Zeh konik kinyan olam. This is referring to an eved ivri. An eved ivri, a yid that's owned by a kayin, and he's owned by him forever. In other words, he was a nirtza. They drilled a hole in his ear, and therefore he's being owned now. He remains with his master for 50 years until Yovel. So that's the toishav, that he's his resident. He lives with him. Sacher, when the pasuk says sacher, zeh konikin yishanim. This refers to an eved ivri that's owned for 6 years. That's the maximum an eved ivri usually works for. So that's both of these cases. It's saying when you have an eved ivri that's owned by a kohen, that whether he's a nirtza, whether he's owned for 6 years, that he doesn't eat truma. So that's what the pasuk is teaching me. So I need both of them. Now the Braisa continues and explains that v'yoymat toishav. Let the pasuk say that even a Eved Ivri that's with you for a longer period of time, that even he can't eat Truma, there's no need to say that the Sacher, that the Eved Ivri that's only with you for 6 years, that he can't eat. I would say, if he's acquired by you forever, meaning until Yovel, he can't eat Truma. For sure, if he's only acquired to you for 6 years, for sure he can't eat. So the Gemara answers, no, Ilu Kain, if we would only say Toishav, then I would not interpret Toishav like we're saying now. I would say Toishav Zakani Kin Yishana. Maybe Toishav means you buy an Eved Ivri and he's a resident living with you, maybe just for 6 years. But then I would say Aval Kani Kin Yinolam, if you buy an Eved and he becomes a Nirtza and he's staying with you until Yovel, Eichel. Maybe you own him to a stronger extent and he could eat Truma. So therefore, Bas Sacher v'limid al Toishav. When the Torah writes the term Sacher, that he's hired by you only for 6 years, it teaches me, it clarifies what the term Toishav means. That even if you own an Eved Ivri forever, ein Eichel. You cannot eat Truma. So we see here clearly in the Braisa that the term Toishav and Sacher that it says by Truma are not extra words. It's coming to teach me this halacha regarding an Eved Ivri, that he can't eat Truma. Elok says the Gemara, the Pesach Mufni. When it says that a Toishav and a Sachir doesn't eat from the carbon Pesach, that's extra. Hi Toishav and Sachir, the Kosav Rachmana be Pesach. When the Torah says a Toishav and a Sachir, which as we explain now, refers to an Eved Ivri, that he cannot eat from the carbon Pesach. My new, what is this saying over here? It doesn't mean literally a Toishav and a Sacher, an Eved Ivri that's owned until Yovel or for 6 years, and it's saying that this Eved Ivri does not eat from the carbon Pesach. Why doesn't he eat from the carbon Pesach? A Yid that sells himself as an Eved Ivri becomes potter from making a carbon Pesach. But didn't we just say regarding Truma, by Truma we say that even though he's owned by a Kayin, his ownership of the Kayin that owns him is not a real full ownership that he owns his body fully. So therefore, he doesn't eat Truma. So I see that his master did not fully acquire his body. He's still independent, and therefore he doesn't eat Truma with the Kayin. So Hachanami, regarding the Carbon Pesach as well, his master doesn't fully own him. He's an independent Yid, and just like any other Yid, he should be obligated to bring a Carbon Pesach. So what does the Pasuk mean when it says Toishav and Sacher should not eat from the Carbon Pesach? So therefore it must mean these words Toishav and Sacher are extra words, and because they're extra, it can be used for the Gzeira Shaveh. Now Taisus clarifies pshat in this. What does it mean? It's extra words. The Gemara just asked the question. When it says that a Toishav and a Sacher can't eat from the carbon Pesach, it's just simply not true. A Toishav and a Sacher, which is an Eved Ivri, could eat. So how could the Gemara just say that it's extra? It's like a lie. Taisus says the pasuk is going to say a lie. Taisus answers, Elamai, the way the Gemara understands this is, when it says here by carbon Pesach, Toishav and Sacher, it's not referring to an Eved Ivri. It's referring to an Eved Kanani that you hire, that's an Eved by you. And it's telling you that an Eved Kananik does not eat from the carbon Pesach. And therefore the Gemara is saying on that it's extra. Because this that a guy doesn't eat from the carbon Pesach, there's another pasuk. It already says, Kol benecha leyechol bay. It's not necessary to say it again. So therefore they're extra words. Fragt the Gemara, Vakati mufne mitzad echad, but not comes out that you have a Gzeira Shaveh. Every Gzeira Shaveh consists of a word in one place and another word in another place. So here we have Truma and Pesach. But we just pointed out that by Truma the words of Toishav and Sacher are not extra. Over here only by Pesach it's extra. So V'shamina leila Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Lazar says, the Omar, he says, Mufna mitzad echad, anytime you have a Gzeira Shaveh and there's only the word in one side of this Gzeira Shaveh that's extra, L'meidin, you could learn the Gzeira Shaveh, but umishivin. If there's a reason why they're not similar, you can give an answer, you can refute it. So if so, over here, this according to Rabbi Lazar, we could refute this Gzeira Shaveh as well. Says the Gemara, no, over here, Kivin de Lugufe Leitzarech, because these two words of Toishav and Sacher that it says by Pesach, both are extra, so therefore, Shadichad Alamed v'Shadichad Amalamed. One word which is extra we use for the Lamed, what we're learning out to, which is by Truma, and one is for the Malamed, which is by Pesach. So it's as if you have two extra words, one by Truma and one by Pesach. So this is the Gzeira Shaveh based on the fact that you have two extra words on both sides, the source and the place where you're learning out to. Okay, so that's the Gzeira Shaveh according to Rabbi Lazar. Now the Gemara asks, so we're learning this out from Carbon Pesach. If so, maybe we should use this Gzera Shava for more details, to compare, to learn out from Korban Pesach. So not just like by a Korban Pesach, an Einon, a person that his relative passed away and that's on that day itself, so he's not allowed to eat from a Korban Pesach. Maybe I should say regarding Truma, that an Einon is not allowed to eat Truma. So the Gemara answers, and we had this drasha before, the pasuk says, V'chol zar, that every zar should not eat Truma. What do I learn from this? Zar is amarti lach, that only a zar, if you're not a kayin, if you're Yisrael, so you can't eat Truma, but v'lo yaninas, a kayin, which is an Einon, could still eat Truma. Frek the Gemara, if you have this drasha here to exclude something, when it says V'chol zar, so maybe you should say v'lo yarelos, that a kayin, which is an oral, is not excluded from eating Truma as well. Maybe that's the drasha. We're learning out from Korban Pesach that an oral can't eat Truma. And we're learning from V'chol zar that an Einon could eat. But maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you learn from here that an oral could eat Truma. Says the Gemara, but we brought before the drasha, Haksiv Toishav V'sach. We had a Gzera Shava to learn out from Korban Pesach that an oral cannot eat Truma. So you can't say you learn out from V'chol zar that he could. Frek the Gemara, O Mareisa, what is it that you see that you learn out from V'chol zar to exclude an Einon that he could eat Truma, and you learn from Korban Pesach to say that an oral cannot eat Truma? Maybe you should reverse it. Says the Gemara, no, Mistavre, it's more logical to say, Arelos Havelele Rabuye, that you should learn from Korban Pesach regarding an oral that was stringent about this oral, that he can't eat Truma, because we're more stringent with an oral than with an Einon. Why? Shekain, and here the Gemara brings a siman for the following stringencies that the Gemara is about to say, Maisim Krusim Bedavar Ha'eved. So what are the stringencies you find by an oral? The Gemara brings a whole list of stringencies here. Mechusa Maisa, an oral, the issue is he had no bris. A bris means that he's lacking an action that has to be done to make him kosher. Umaisa begufay, and this is something which is lacking an action that has to be done in his physical body. And va'onish kares, and also there's an einish kares if you don't do a bris. And the yeshna lefnei dibur, we see that this is a very important mitzvah. This comes even before Matan Torah. This is a mitzvah the Eibishter gave to Avraham Avinu. And also we find milas charav avodav ma'keves. By Korban Pesach it says that even if only your servants or your children don't have a bris, it holds you back from eating the Korban Pesach as well. So we see all these things that are special stringencies regarding an idol that we don't find by an Einon. Frek Gemara Atarabe. If I can show you to the contrary that there are certain stringencies that you find dafka by an Einon. What is that? Aninas havelele rabuye. Maybe you should say that an Einon is more stringent, so I should learn an Einon that you can't eat Truma. Sheken yashnei b'chol shah. First of all, an Einon is something that could happen anytime. An adol, if a person makes a bris, then that's it. He's not an adol anymore. An Einon, a relative that passes away, that could happen anytime. And so that's one thing. And also, v'neheg is ba'anoshim v'noshim. This is something which is possible by men or women. And this situation of an Einon is not something that you can take action and do anything about it. It's something that could happen. So therefore you have these stringencies that apply to an Einon and not to an adol. Says the Gemara, no, but Hanoch nefishon. Those stringencies that we pointed out regarding an adol are more than the stringencies than an adol. We pointed out 5 different stringencies by an adol, so they're more than there is by an adol. So therefore we learn more than an Einon, that is. So therefore we learn out from Korban Pesach that an adol cannot eat Truma, and we don't learn out from there that an Einon cannot eat Truma. Rava gives a different answer. Rava mar b'loyanach nefishan, even without the fact that by adol the stringencies are more than Einon, namile motzes amris, doesn't make sense to learn out from Korban Pesach that an Einon does not eat Truma, and not to learn out that an adol can't eat Truma. Why? Because shafkina and arelos, you would leave over, you would not learn out arelos, the chsiv, begufe, de Pesach. That halacha that an adol does not eat Pesach, that says explicitly in the pasuk by Pesach itself. V'yalfina and aninus me Pesach, you're going to learn out the halacha of an Einon, that an Einon shouldn't be allowed to eat Truma. You're going to learn that from Pesach. The Pesach Gufe, it doesn't even say it explicitly by Pesach. By Pesach itself, mi Meiser Gamrinan. We only learn it out from by Meiser, where it says that an Einon can eat. So therefore, it doesn't make sense. If you're going to learn out Truma from Pesach, it's more logical to say to learn from Pesach what it says explicitly by Pesach, which is that an adol doesn't eat, and not to learn out the halacha of an Einon, which it doesn't say explicitly there. Gemara has another question. If you're learning from Pesach, Ima Pesach, so maybe we should learn for Trumah from Pesach, just like by Korban Pesach, Milas, Chorav, Avodav, Makeves. As we mentioned before, that in order to be allowed to eat the Korban Pesach, it's not enough that you have a bris, but your children and your servants also have to have a bris, and that otherwise it holds you back from eating the Korban. Af Trumah, Milas, Chorav, Avodav, Makeves. So too I should say regarding Trumah, the if you eat Trumah, the milah of your children or Avodim should also hold you back. So Gemara says, no, we don't learn that out. Why? Because on Makrav, there it says, Umalta oisai, oz yechabay. You make a bris for your children, and then you can eat. What do you learn from this pasuk? Milas charav avodav makeves boy melechel bepesach. Because it says boy, I say, only there, by the Korban Pesach, the milah of your children or the avodim will hold you back from eating. But ve'im milas charav avodav makeves betrumah. But the milah of the charav and the avodim does not hold you back from eating trumah. That's the miyut. Says the Gemara, if the word boy is a miyut, if so, hihachi eime, and say the same thing regarding oral. We just learned that from, according to Rabbi Lazi, you learn from Pesach to Trumah, that an oral cannot eat Trumah, but hihachi eime kol oral lo yechal boy. By the Korban Pesach it says an oral cannot eat it. So boy ein oichel, only for Korban Pesach we say oral can't eat, aval oichel ube Trumah. But he could eat Trumah. Maybe I should learn out from that boy to exclude and say that that doesn't apply to Trumah. Says the Gemara, but Haksiv Taisha v'Sacher. We brought before a Gzeira Shava, that we compare Trumah to Pesach, that teaches me that just like by Pesach, Adal can eat by Trumah as well. So the Gemara again asks, so what do you see to say this, that when it comes to the milah of Scharav Avadav, for that you use the miyut not to apply it to Trumah, and when it comes to the Adal, regarding his milah himself, that you are learning from Pesach. Says the Gemara, Mistavra, it's logical to say, Areilus de Gufe, Havelele Rabuye, that Areilus, this halacha of a person himself being a adol. So that makes sense to include and to say that was stringent that he can't eat trumah, Shekei Maise Begufe, like we said before, there's an action here that has to be done and it's in his own body, Va'onish Karis, and there's Karis if he doesn't do a bris, and therefore it's more stringent. So that's something I learn out, that he can't eat trumah. And I don't learn out the halacha of the milah of his children or his servants. Says the Gemara, no, Adarab, milas charav avadav avalei rabuye. There's also a stringency regarding the milah of his children or his servants. Sheken yeshna v'chol shah. That's something that could come up any time. It's not just a one-time thing like by the person himself. So again, the Gemara says, like it said before, hanach nefishin. The chumrah that there is by the halacha that you have to be mal yourself, the chumras are much more. If you buy say more, another point, another answer the Gemara gives, below yanach nefishan, even if those chumras are not more, nami le'matzah samris. You can't say that you're going to learn out that an adol could eat trumah, but you can't eat trumah if your children don't have a bris. Because mi ikemidi, is there anything that in any place that you could say that areilus de gufei loy ma'akvebe, that whether he had a bris or not, that will not prevent him of eating trumah. But areilus da achirine, but the fact that his children or his servants, they don't have a bris ma'akvebe, that would hold him back of eating trumah. That doesn't make sense. To say that their areilus would hold him back, but his own areilus does not. So therefore we learn out that an adol cannot eat trumah, but the areilus of his children or servants do not hold him back from eating trumah. Gemara continues. Let's just finish this Indian here a little bit further into the next Amud until it brings Rabbi Akiva's opinion. So Hashtad Amrit boy l'drasha. So now you said when it says the term boy, it's an exclusion. It comes to darshan hudasa. That's what it comes for. So now what does it say by Korban Pesach? Kol ben nechar lo yechal boy. A ben nechar guy should not eat the Korban Pesach. It says the term boy. Lamali. What is that term boy coming to teach me? Says the Gemara, boy hamaras das paiseles. That boy, regarding Korban Pesach, Hamaras Das, a person that converted, he dropped the Yiddishkeit, he's a kaifer, he's not, Rashi says Hamaras Das means that his actions are strange, he's not connected to the Eibishter anymore, so over here, this holds him back from eating the Korban Pesach, Ven Hamaras Das Peselas b'Maiser, but regarding Maiser, he cannot, this does not hold him back from eating Maiser. Another pasuk where it says the term boy, Kol Oro lo yochel boy, as we brought before. It says also by Korban Pesach that an adol does not eat lamali. What is this word boy coming to exclude? Boy eichel, that an adol cannot eat from the Korban Pesach, aval eichelu b'matzah u'mara, but he could eat matzah and mara. So together with the Pesach, he eat the matzah and mara. So this adol could eat matzah and mara. And the Gemara explains, v'itzterich l'michtav adol, v'itzterich l'michtav kol ben nechar. It has to tell me both of them. that the adult can't eat, and a ben nechar, person that is serving of a zada, or he's not, he's converted, so he doesn't eat either, has to say both. Ikas rachmana adol, if we would say that an adult can't eat from the Pesach, mishum de ma'is, the arelus in a person's body is disgusting. Aval ben necha delay ma'os, regarding a ben necha, a person that's estranged to his father in heaven, you can't say this term of ma'os like it says regarding arelus. So emelai, I would say that doesn't apply, and he could eat. And the reverse, vikas rachmana kol ben necha, if it would say that a ben necha doesn't eat, mishum dein liba l'shamayim, because his heart is not connected to the Eibush anymore. Maybe he can't eat. Aval adol, the liba l'shamayim, but an adol, his heart, he's connected to the Eibush, but he just couldn't make a bris. Emelai, maybe I would say it doesn't apply and he could eat. So therefore, tzricha, therefore you have to have both of these psukim to say that an adol can't eat and a ben necha can eat. One more line, the Gemara here says, mimenu lamali. We find by the Korban Pesach, it says, al toichlu mimenu na. So Rashi says, because we're pointing out that the word boy is an exclusion, so the Gemara wants to know also the word mimenu, from it, which is only the Korban Pesach, it also is an exclusion. Lamali, what's this exclusion? So the Gemara answers, Lekid Rabbe Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. The exclusion is like what Rabbe says in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, which the Gemara will bring right over here on Daf Ayin Dalet, so we'll wait until we get there to see what we learn from this pasuk Mimeno.